philosophers are all unsaved atheists and pantheists, and their concept of life is natural. And naturalism is simply the teaching that whatever is real is material. Whatever is material is real. That is, it's if you think of material in the forms of atoms, as most of them did, they believe in atoms, believe in atomic structure, although they may not have the modern scientific thing. You'll find by the studies they believe in monads and atomic structure and this and that. And the basic teaching of naturalism is that man is his own end into himself, and naturalism is the main theology of Russia and the United Nations. That is, what is material is real, what is real is material. Now, an idealist, a little bit later, will throw a little kind of whipped cream in here to kind of thicken things up and say the material comes from the ideal, or that at least some ideas are just as real as some material things. Matter of fact, the real idealist goes beyond this and says that only ideas are real and the material is an illusion. Buddhism goes off this way. And the United Nations will subscribe to some ideal as long as they affect things material, dialectical materialism. After all, the United Nations is an international socialist organization, as anybody knows, and its leadership and decision has always been guided by international socialists. Those of us who are up on our right-wing literature and our Birth Society and our Christian Crusade, we know who pays the bills to the United Nations, and we know who makes the decision in the wars. United States pays the bills and Russia makes the decisions. Anyway, as I was saying before, I was so rudely interrupted. The realist is not as idealistic as the idealist. The realist is a combination of naturalism and idealism, where the realist says that although ideas are real, material is also real. You have to deal with both. The pragmatist then goes beyond the realism and says the only thing that's true is what works, because only the combination of the ideal and the material that brings results is practical, and the good is practical. That is, do as you please. Now, of course, all the philosophers will deny this. You won't find one philosopher out of 20,000 that doesn't put the brakes on pragmatism or naturalism somewhere. Not even Epicurus, the Epicurean, eat, drink, and be merry, would suggest unbridled liberty without restraint. Because all these hypocrites see the danger in the depravity of man after denying that man is depraved. That is, depravity is its own judge. And as soon as these fellows begin to theorize on archaeology, the meaning of values, right away they begin to lay down certain rules to follow, because something instinctively in them tells them you're a liar. Now, it is perfectly all right to lay down rules for an Epicurean because he won't obey them anyway. It is perfectly all right to say, don't do anything wrong, and then to say, your conscience is your guide and what's right and what's wrong. That's safe to say because you can see your conscience. 1 Timothy 4, matter of fact, you can kill it and defile it. Titus chapter 1. The Bible is always superior to any set of philosophers. And it's perfectly all right to say, well, the best rule for conduct would be, don't do anything that you couldn't recommend to somebody else. You know why? Because after a while you can recommend anything to anybody else. I mean, a drunkard that can take 3 quarts a day without getting drunk can recommend it to you. Another rule is, don't recommend anything or follow anything or suggest anything that everybody couldn't live by. And of course, this is what we know, what is called, this is what I call a big funnyism. This is a big hee-hee-ha-ha-ho. Because you certainly couldn't recommend for everybody to do what you do, and you couldn't recommend everybody what everybody does. Races are different, cultures are different. So to begin with, we must remember that no matter what bars the philosophers put in their archaeology, in naturalism, realism, idealism, or pragmatism, still the philosophers as they stand are depraved, and the philosophies are depraved. Pragmatism is the final outcome of a synthesis between naturalism, idealism, and realism. Now, once these 4 branches have been told to the student and explained, you'll find definitions for them. Almost any philosophy can be crammed into those 4. The existentialism, you know, and radical empiricism, and neo-Aristotelian, you know, all the junk can be crammed in there. As a matter of fact, in the book of Ecclesiastes, you'll find a line or two on almost every philosophy man's ever thought of. And And this is as it should be, for the wisest man who ever lived wrote Ecclesiastes, and that's why they deny that Solomon wrote it. You get it, don't you? Now, even why the argument about who the preacher was in Ecclesiastes, because the wisest man that ever lived wrote it, that finished off the philosophers 600 years before they were born, because Solomon got through writing more than 600 years before Socrates had his diapers changed. Having pointed out the four major branches of philosophy, then we should take the student and show him what philosophy deals with, and give him the technical term, show him that metaphysics deals with the origin or structure of the universe. Cosmology is part of that study. Show him that axiology, the study of values, is part of the work of any major philosophy. The epistemology, the philosophy on how to gain knowledge. And of course that's the most important one, for after all, if the epistemology is not correct, whatever material you have to build your philosophy with cannot be too certain. So axiology and metaphysics and epistemology, and of course work on cosmology and man, the universe, and this and that, so forth and so on. Philosophy is mainly concerned with order and structure and the means of obtaining knowledge and the values of things, which we call ethics. The modern school, of course, is shot through these things, and you'll always hear the national educators talk about values instead of morals. Very typical, very typical. And you'll see that when you get into study of the philosophies, how all of them are basically systems to get you to reject Christ and reject the Bible and turn your back on God and live like an animal. But they're disguised very neatly, full of such terms as total, in-depth, relative, communicative, ethnic dialogue in the substrata or the superstructure of the ethnic community, in the communal witness of the in-depth study of certain areas where the values must be meaningfully relevant, see? I mean, hogs and dogs have all kinds of ways of puking and eating vomit, but you have to make it smell good so the suckers will come to the trough. And this is the work of philosophy. Now, in teaching the student the main studies of philosophy and the main branches, one should give attention to the arguments for the existence of God, the cosmological argument, the teleological argument, the ontological argument, the ethnological argument, the anthropological argument, and so forth and so on. One should give some time in the course to the study of logic, not a great deal, don't waste a lot of time on it. Logic is irrational, just like Adolf said, and he got it right. But showing the mistakes in logic, how logic can be mistaken, showing how false notions can be obtained about things by tradition or custom or intuition or feeling, and above all, stress the infallible authority, the absolute revelation of God that never misses at one time. Then on the philosophies, in philosophy, begin to teach the lives and teaching of the philosophers, critiquing the teaching of each philosopher as you go, and showing him the weaknesses in his epistemology, in his metaphysics, and his epistemology, and so forth and so on. It wouldn't hurt before you finish the course to give the student a brief summary of the teaching of Carl Menninger's book called Man Against Himself, which is the basic format for the United Nations psychiatrist, who will shortly commit all the Christians to insane asylums for being antisocial and threats to normal society. Carl Menninger, the unsaved, Bible-rejecting blasphemer of Topeka, Kansas, wrote a book one time on Man Against Himself, in which he tries to prove that the martyrs for Jesus Christ were people who had suicidal tendencies. And Carl Menninger's work and the work by William James and the variety of religious experiences, or Henry James, I never could forget which it was. I mean, both the clowns on the same circus. And these books are attempts to prove that all Christian experience is psychotic. And of course, psychopolitics by the Russian Institute in the United Nations will be the efforts of the United Nations to commit all Christians to insane asylums as being psychotic. So the Christian should have some warning about this and be taught how to deal with the nut doctors and the head shrinkers on their own terms. The Christian should understand the tradesman's terminology of psychosis, neurosis, complexes, inhibitions, frustrations, compensations, and you know all the gas. And learn enough of them at least get a working knowledge with, so when he gets to the head shrinker, he can put him in a psychotic state. Trying to think again, most psychiatrists smoke, you know, Oedipus complex, that kind of thing. And most psychiatrists think they're God. They've tried to substitute their science as the authoritative source instead of the Bible. So most of them are extreme egotists, and a number of things you can put on. Most of them are psychotic in their ability to think that talk or rational process or reason can solve all problems. And most of them are immoral. They have no morals. That is, most of them are on an animal level in their dealings. I don't say all of them, most of them. And the Christian should know this, so when he gets to deal with them, he can deal with them on their own grounds. So the philosophy should be studied, winding up with the modern American pragmatists, Paul Sartre, whatever his name is, the Frenchman, and similar crooks, maybe Timothy O'Leary's drug hallucination exposition, some of those, so he can see where philosophy leads. It leads to hell. And he should understand this and know this, and at the same time master the technical terminology, so if he wants to appear as a fathead, he can do it. All right, the next course will be systematic theology. Any systematic theology we can use. The one by Lewis Sperry Schaeffer is perhaps the best, being a premillennial systematic theology. However, the student should be acquainted with the classic Reformed theologies of Berkhoff, Kuyper, Dabney, and Hodge. Most of these works are more scholarly than Lewis Sperry Schaeffer's work, and as a consequence, more muddled and further off base. The Christian should study the systematic theologies of the Reformed theologians, especially the swamp theology that deals with predestination, foreordination, eternal decrees, special and general calling, and so forth and so on, conditional election, and know why Calvin was a tulip man and what the points of tulip are, and know why Ephesians 1:4 overthrows the entire system. The Christian should be acquainted with soteriology, eschatology, angelology, amariology, and so forth and so on, the main branches of systematic theology, and be able to debunk successfully any theologian's work that contradicts the King James 1611 authorized version. Any systematic theology textbook can be used, and each branch can be taken up. The simplest form of systematic theology is a book called Bible Doctrines, which can be used with the same course, thus saving the expense of 5 courses. After all, biblical theology, systematic theology, and historical theology, and Bible doctrines, and New Testament theology and Old Testament theology are the same course. You just pay more money for more gas. Bible Doctrines by William Evans is the best condensed, simplified course on systematic theology you can buy. I believe he's a graduate of Moody Bible Institute. Bible Doctrines by William Evans, which is very good for a basic beginner in theology, and the rest of the more complicated work can be woven into that simplified outline by Evans. All right, in the course of evolution, of course, many source books and textbooks are necessary. The most important of these are by Henry Morris, Harry Rimmer, Byron Nelson, Wilbur Smith, and Rehwinkel. The catastrophic geologist, George McGrady Price, should be studied. The catastrophic geologist, Vladivosky, the Russian writer, and the catastrophic geologist Patton, I forget his first name, who wrote the Biblical Flood and the Ice Age Epic, should be used as source references. And the Christian studying the theory of evolution should start where they start and then wind up in a different place and they wind up. First of all, about evolution, the Christian should be given the classical position of Darwin. However, the teacher shouldn't stop here. He should avail himself of the excellent work by Dr. Edward Hills called Believing Bible Study, and show how the Darwinian theory of evolution has been modified considerably by the Russians and communists, and Lysenko and Steinwolf and some of the rest of them, into a modern concept of mathematical statistical probability. Now, we'll talk about that later, but on this tape and laying out the course, the first thing the student should learn is the classic Darwinian position. The classic Darwinian position is that this universe has always been here, the eternity of matter. Matter is eternal, without a creator. although Darwin wavered from a deistic position, a theistic position, to an atheistic position several times under the ministry of Wilberforce and Huxley. And don't tell me he didn't become an atheist. He didn't get an atheist. And don't give me that stuff about the dying deathbed on the track. You couldn't get it documented if you had to. Let's talk fact. Anyway, as I was saying, Darwin's position should be taught the eternity of matter, where matter gradually evolves into what you have now, which is gradually evolving into something else, which will eventually gradually evolve into something nobody knows. Now, if somebody said that wasn't Darwin's position, I'm sorry you're ignorant, I'm sorry you're stupid, and above all, I'm sorry you can't take a mass of material and condense it and reduce it to the lowest common denominator, but that's how the snow drifts. That's how the crow flies. If you don't believe that, you will after you've studied a while, and study a little bit more, and then come around and see me. All right, now the classic position is the universe has always been here, the eternity of matter, and it is evolving or developing. Proof of this is taken from what we observe on Earth. The proofs for Darwin's theory of evolution are, number one, the fossil record. And you should demonstrate to the students some so-called proofs of Darwin's theory on the fossil record from Cenozoic period, as Mesozoic period, as Paleozoic, Cambrian, Precambrian. Of course, when you get to Precambrian, you have a little bit of trouble. There aren't any fossils in the Precambrian. And show the fossil record, whatever he said it was. The second proof for evolution is vestigial organs, the fact that organs still remain on man, such as the pineal gland, and the inner fold in the eye, and the appendix, and the tonsils, that no longer are used and have ceased their function, which proved once as an animal, when you were an animal, they had a function. The next proof, so-called, for our evolution is uranium breakdown in lead, or the Libby-carbon-14 experiment, showing the dissipation of organic material, which should prove the ancient age of the Earth. The next proof for evolution, so-called, is the evidence of the geologic strata and the layers of rocks and the condition of rocks and metamorphic igneous sedimentary rock. The next proof for evolution is the similarity in structure or anatomy between animals and men. The next proof, that was going to be a proof, was the blood precipitation test by Nuttall, a good name, an excellent name if I ever heard of one, N-U-T-A-L-L, all nut, which didn't prove anything. And the last argument for it has to do with mutations and variations within a species, and the survival of the species and adaptation, has to do with what Haeckel called ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny, which was a long way of saying you got bats for brains. Ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny means every being that shows up have to go through what every other being showed up when he showed up. But you couldn't charge a kid $10,000 a year for that kind of curriculum, so bamboozle him and tell him ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny, and let the kid think you're smart. All right, those are the proofs for it. To debunk the theory of evolution, all you have to do is take those proofs and just unhinge them. And they're very easy to unhinge, especially if you have the works by Rimmer and Nelson and Morris and Rehwinkel and Patton. There is also a very excellent article in the Standard Bible Encyclopedia, which I recommended for a library, by John Root Stratton, whom the Pope called one of the four horsemen of the devil, the other three being W.B. Riley, J. Frank Norris, and Mordecai Ham. And Bishop John Root Stratton has a very excellent article against evolution in the Standard Bible Encyclopedia, and of course there are many other very good articles. Byron Nelson's After Its Kind is the greatest debunking thing you ever read in your life about mutation and transmutation of species and variety of species. Also, the work done by the converted monk, I forget his name, is very instructive also. In disproving the fossil record, little needs to be said at all. You can get photographs of the National Geographic to prove that every ancient species of lower class is still here, and the ones that aren't here they invented and painted, and they don't have fossil evidence for them. You also can prove that what they call gaps or links between the species they profess to have found are monsters of bad birth, and you can find no fossils in the Precambrian period, and all the fossils appear, as one writer said, with Melchizedekian abruptness, which means they showed up as quick as Melchizedek popped up in Genesis. You also can find the lower forms survive the higher forms, contrary to Darwin's theory. You also find many times the fossils on the wrong layer. You can prove that Piltdown and Java and Neanderthal man are just about as well established scientifically as Willie Bo Peep and Easter bunnies laying colored ping pong balls. And to make matters worse or better, if you go down around Flat Rose, Texas, between San Antonio and Fort Worth, you'll find a man's footprints in the same geologic strata with the dinosaurs' footprints. And of course, at the state universities, they just don't say anything about these matters because, I say, old boy, it's just too embarrassing for words, don't you know? And one fellow said if those footprints were found in the same strata where the dinosaurs' tracks, all us geologists ought to quit our profession, go back to driving garbage trucks. To which God's people all said, Amen. And it's a more honest living, that's for certain. The fossil record proves very definitely that evolution is a joke, and nothing could be any funnier than the fossil record. I was speaking of vestigial organs. You'll find fine discussions of the matter. You'll find every vestigial organ, the human body, has a practical use, or had a practical use when the baby was growing up. Along the line of blood precipitation tests, it's just too funny for words. I mean, the blood precipitation test shows the whale's kin to the tiger, and the tiger's kin to the pig, and the pig matches the bat, and the man came from the bat, which would make him bats, I suppose. And, of course, the argument from similarity of structural anatomy, of course, is a great big hee-haw. If they were the same, what would that prove? I mean, you big enough fool to think that those cars out there on the road evolved from each other because they're similar? What crazy ass would think that? They weren't evolved, they were developed. A creator and a designer worked on them. Can't you see that? Imagine some incredible idiot getting out there on the highway and watching the Porsches and Volkswagens and Toyotas and Datsuns and Chevrolets and Fords and Plymouths and Oldsmobiles and Cadillacs and Lincolns and Thunderbirds go by and say they're all kin to each other because they evolved from each other. Did you ever see an Oldsmobile crash into a tree and turn into a Toyota? Did you ever go to a junk heap where they scrap Chevrolets and see a Ford come out? I mean, of all the nerves. If man's structural similarity was like animals, that wouldn't prove they evolved from animals. That would prove a designer and creator made their structure somewhat like an animal's. You say that proves, no it doesn't, because then you have to look at the other similarities. You should teach your students that no bunch of animals who were trained to sing, such as the birds, can be taught to sing in four-part harmony. I don't care what you teach a parrot or a parakeet to say, you can't carry on a conversation with them. Animals can't communicate in words. Animals have 7 words. Shut up, go away, come here, I'm hurt, I'm hungry, help, and maybe a word like I love you. And outside of that, they have no vocabulary. You can't tell any animal what you learned on this tape. You say we're working on it. You're a blank fool. A fellow said if all the monkeys in the world, yeah, we know all that stuff, you know, all that stuff. I like going with a trained parakeet, you know, in a house saw some robbers come in and tie the old couple up and begin to rob the safe. And the parakeet opened the door with a bill, went to the telephone, took off the receiver, put a bill in the numbers and dialed the numbers and got the police station. And the policeman picked it up. The parakeet said, pretty baby, pretty baby, pretty baby, pretty baby. I mean, that's about it. That's about it. Like the fellow said, he tried to get his parakeet to talk for 2 weeks. She never did. She finally died. And the store owner said, well, she was guaranteed to speak. Didn't she say anything? And the fellow owner said, well, yeah, right before she died, she said, food. You can't teach them nothing. A fellow said, well, these monkeys, if they have an infinite number of time, they could write all the works of Shakespeare. You're crazy. The second law of thermodynamics shows all the monkeys would die, the typewriters would wear out, and there wouldn't anybody alive to read the works of Shakespeare if they're there, so how you know they were there? You see, these incredible boobs always pick up some hypothetical thing where if. Well, I'll tell you something. If you're not born again, you're going to burn in a lake of fire. How about that one? Work on that one for a while. You talk about scientific fact. Why would you accept a scientific fact if an infinite number of monkeys could work an infinite number of years? They could type the work of Shakespeare, and yet you wouldn't believe it if you're not born again. You go straight down because there's nothing in you to defy the law of gravity to make you go up. Folks are funny, you know. I like what Bob Newhart said. He said these monkeys were trying to type out the works of Shakespeare, and they had checkers to check them every day to see if any were coming close to it. And finally a guy went over there and picked the paper out of the typewriter and said, "Hey, Harry, come here." He said, "I think we got something here." He said, "What does it say?" It says, "To be or not to be, that is the beloved skitty." I mean, that's it, boy. Yeah, the typewriter just all shot. All right, the greatest proof that these animals are, man didn't come to these animals is real simple. The second law of thermodynamics teaches that all is entropy in a closed system. And for this, the reader should give careful study to the work by E. Wyler Smith called Man, His Origin and His Destiny. And you'll find that in a closed system like Darwin had, where no outside creator or developer intervenes to produce life, there is not only a missing gap between the man and the animals, there are 100 missing links between the first cell animal and the next one, 100 missing links between the lowest vegetable and the highest vegetable, and 100 missing links between the highest vegetable and the lowest animal, and 100 missing links between the ape and man. It isn't a matter of one missing link. You don't go around picking up elephant knee bones and pretending they're skulls, like they did recently in Africa, and then say, this is one link, now if we can just find some other bone and pretend it's another link, we've got all the links but one. No, sir. There's more to it than that. The law of thermodynamics teaches that in a closed system, entropy dissipates energy in the elements, and unless there is an intervention of an outside force to bring life, all complex forms break down into simpler forms till finally they turn to a massive, molten gray nothing. You take a can of sardines and put it on the shelf and leave it locked up, and in 450 years, it'll be decayed. The biggest argument against evolution is that it's intellectual insanity. That's the biggest argument. The uranium does break down, the carbon-14 does break down, the sun is losing heat, the earth is moving outward in space, the earth is getting older, the planets are burning out, they're going to bury you. Now, what fool would think it was the reverse unless he was an insane man? Put the second law of thermodynamics on him. No man can be an evolutionist and be a consistent scientist. There's no way in the world to do it. On the argument about ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny. That's a boo-boo, too. The embryo of the child can never be mistaken for the embryo of an animal, according to embryologists. And according to embryologists, the development of a fetus and the embryo in a child are not in the least bit like one cell to two cell to three cell to a jellyfish to an earthworm, you know, that kind of business. The head on that baby develops all out of proportion to the body compared with the development of any amoeba into a planaria, paramecium, hydra, earthworm, or fish. There is no comparison at all. And so on. Now, as I said before, the way to handle that thing is debunk them with the evidence. The best evidence given against any type of evolution is the evidence found in Patton's book called The Biblical Flood and Ice Age Epic. His argument on orogenesis, the source of mountains, his argument on erratic boulders, found also in Morris's book on the flood, and his argument on frozen mastodons throws out of the window forever any cock and bull story about anything gradually becoming anything. We're dealing with a God of catastrophe who deals with crisis. And the crisis theology of Barth and Brunner 70 years ago was an attempt to restore some of the sanity to liberalism that is still missing. Barth and Brunner and Tillich and Niebuhr, of course, were poor, Bible-rejecting, God-defying men, but at least they saw the shortage in liberalism and modernism, and instead of returning to the Bible, they made a super history out of the Bible, Urgeschichte, and return to what they call crisis theology and existentialism, the now, the happening, in order to get back to the fact that evolution is a blatant lie. And your student should know that and know why. Furthermore, your student should be taught some good reading from Mein Kampf by Adolf Hitler, so they can see how a consistent evolutionist works. No course in evolution in a state university should be considered scholarly or educational unless it includes at least a survey of the work by Adolf Hitler called Mein Kampf and Das Kapital, which was dedicated to Charles Darwin. If you want to see how evolution, the survival of the fittest, and the adaptation of the species works in practice, you should study the book by Eugene Kogan called The Theory and Practice of Hell and the History of Communism in Red China and Soviet Russia under Mao Tse and Stalin and Lenin. And don't ever make any mistake about it. Hitler was perfectly consistent for an evolutionist. He believed in treating people just like you treat animals because they were kin. And what's good enough for a dog is good enough for a man, if you're consistent. Now, evolutionists like the kind we have in American universities are not the least bit consistent, even though they develop an animal culture. The modern state university campus, of course, is an animal culture. Rather, it's an immoral culture, where when the student came, he was told to have an open mind. He opened his mind and they put garbage in it. And he came out with himself as the supreme God and judge, and that was the work of philosophy. The work of philosophy is not to find answers. The work of philosophy is to make you think you're equipped to find the answer for yourself that will do for you. And this is the epitome of the college education. And if some of you Christians ever wonder why some of these jackasses that come out of college are so agnostic, and so if it works for you, it's good, but if what works for you, then it worked for me, and I take what works for me, you take what works for you, and if you want to know why they're about half crazy, that's why. And if you want to know why people graduate from Christian colleges in America coming out talking about the King James is a reliable translation, the ASV is a reliable translation, and the new ASV is a reliable translation, when all three of them contradict each other, you'll find it's because the job of a Christian education is to substitute you for God, and then make you deny absolute authority so people will think you're humble. That's the trick. The trick is to replace God and the Bible with your own noodle, and then profess not to have all the answers so people won't think you worship your own noodle. I mean, the final analysis, there's no such thing as an atheist. Every college professor in the world that's unsaved worships his own brain. And the final court of appeals is his own brain. He's an anarchist. And if you wonder why you have bombing, shooting, and stabbings in colleges, why the highest death rate in colleges outside of automobile accidents is suicide, that's why. Education's a wonderful thing, man. Teach them philosophy, teach them theology, and teach them evolution. Pro and con. So much for this outline of this study. Now we'll briefly discuss a proposed outline for teaching the course on biblical archaeology. Now for the course on archaeology, the textbooks used, which are fair, are Free's book on Bible archaeology, F-R-E-E, published by Zondervan or Erdman, as I forget which. The book by Merrill Unger, and in conjunction with us, Haley's Bible Handbook. Now, between these three and the International Bible Standard Encyclopedia, you'll have access to about anything anybody knows about the matter. There's some other books that you can get, any standard encyclopedia on archaeology or Bible lands, and there's a good one arranged alphabetically. I forget who the author of it is, but you can buy them almost anywhere, are good for this course of instruction. These students should be told what archaeology means. These long words, of course, mean nothing. They're just for hamsters and suckers to get you to pay money. Archaeology actually is just archos, arche, beginnings, ology, knowledge of beginnings. That's all it is. Biology, you know, is knowledge of of plants. Zoology is knowledge of life, you know, and anthropology is knowledge of man, psychology is knowledge of the psyche or the soul, and so forth and so on. And so archaeology is the study, and the main thing that should be pointed out to the Christian in the study of Bible archaeology is that although archaeology has proved the Bible to be true many times, the Bible is always true whether archaeological proves it or not. That's the main thing. Another thing to keep before the student's mind is where archaeology contradicts the Bible, the archaeologist and his entire life work are to be discarded as quickly as a dead cat. As we've said before, and will continue to say, there's no reason why a book that is proved as infallible, as authoritative, and as powerful as the King James Bible should ever knuckle down to some knucklehead who thinks because he found something in the sand, he's smarter than the Holy Spirit. And so this should be pointed out. For example, when the archaeologists proved conclusively it was the Sea of Reeds instead of the Red Sea, the class to get a big laugh out of this and all enjoy a dinner on the grounds and play some ping pong for a while. When the archaeologists proved conclusively it was a local flood at Mesopotamia instead of a universal flood, that's some more fun, goody-goodies for the kiddies. And when archaeology proves the Hebrews didn't know how to make brass, but had to be copper, and it wasn't corn, it was grain, and there weren't any grapes in Egypt, and there weren't any camels, and all this stuff. These are times for great hilarity on the part of the Bible believer, and such archaeological findings should never be taken seriously, no matter who finds them. The main excavators and researchers should be studied, which are a handful, notably Ramsey, who did a great deal of research in Asia Minor on the Apostle Paul and the works of Luke, Nelson Gluck of the Hebrew Oriental Society, who did a good bit of work in Palestine, Garstang, who excavated Jericho, and Willie, who excavated, I say excavated, I keep thinking evacuated, excavated Ur the Chaldees, and there are a few others. Where the archaeological findings back up the King James text, they're to be accepted. Where they don't, they're to be thrown out. Somebody says this kind of subjective. No, as a matter of fact, it's objective and scientific. You see, we have the absolute standard by which other standards can be judged. So having the absolute scientific final standard judge the other by, we don't have to waste a great deal of time with them. And it's very subjective to think that the Bible can be corrected by you. That's where the subjectivity comes in. The Bible is a critic, quick and powerful and sharp than a two-edged sword, and it doesn't have to bow down to anybody. Well, the archaeological discovery should be noted, their main personnel noted. The student should be taught the methods of excavation, notably the horizontal, vertical method, the layer method in digging through a tell, a mound. He should be shown pictures, if possible, on the screen or projector of the main finds, such as the Babylonian cuneiform on the prisms and the stelas, the cylinders, the hieroglyphics, the work found on embedded in clay and various mounds around Nippur and Akkad and other the Chaldees. And he should be shown the finds of pottery they've discovered from the tells and the various levels. He should know something about the method of dating these objects, and especially the false method of dating them, how the scholars keep trying to bring them up, because they don't want an ancient history to reveal itself. It's found in the Bible. And he should know something about how to get a archaeological expedition going, where they come from, who finances them, what kind of work is done, what kind of tools are needed, and shown pictures of these. Excellent pictures can be obtained if anybody has a set of old National Geographics. And the student should be shown as possible as much of this stuff in illustration. At our own school, the Pensacola Bible Institute, I have a personal collection of over 2,000 pictures showing just about everything that's happened since from Adam to the second coming of Christ. This is done by collecting Dorian engravings of the Bible and heaven and hell, by collecting pictures through the years by evolutionists who profess to know something, then by taking illustrations out of scores of magazines and books on the Dark Ages, the Medieval Ages, the primitive religions, ancient Rome, ancient Greece, ancient Mesopotamia, ancient Babylon, and then coupling with these photographs of everything since photography was invented, including scores of photographs of the Civil War, World War I, World War II, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, and then photographs of all the modern inventors, modern musicians, modern painters, sketches and colored pictures of all the ships, airplanes, boats, trains, and the works. And much of this that can be made pictorial to the student, so much the better it is, because the modern student is raised in the television generation where he's trained to think in pictures instead of words. And not only is one picture worth 1,000 words these days, one picture these days is worth about 20,000 books, because the student can no longer read and can no longer comprehend what he reads to a very large extent. So show them as many pictures as you can. Then when you get to Bible history, take them through the King James Bible simultaneous with the archaeological discoveries, showing them discoveries that prove there was a man and woman in Eden, discoveries that show there was an ark that was used and the flood was universal, the Nippur tablets and the Gilgamesh epic, some of these things show all these matters, are taken through simultaneous with the Bible, showing that Abraham did live in Ur of the Chaldees, that it was a real place, there were ziggurats there in the Tower of Babel, show them evidence of the evidence of Shemitic people in Palestine, Hamitic people, the evidence of Joseph's sojourn in Egypt, and the material on the Egyptian dynasties, the pharaohs, give the material on the coming out of the land of Egypt and the arguments about the dates and the settlement of the date before 1490, that is earlier than that, around 1500 or perhaps earlier, show them the material on the oldest city in the world, supposedly, Jericho, from Garstang's evacuations, give the material on the Phoenician religions and the Baal worship, the fertility cults of the Near East, demonstrate to them, if you have a male class, the nature of the Baal worship by pictures and plain talk. If your class is mixed, you'll have to cool it a little, but at least show them from the Word of God, from the book of Numbers, the book of Joshua, and the book of Judges, and the book of Revelation, that the nature of the false worships of the African people always tends to sex, because the Negro people have a sex problem. And their worship service always wind up in wild music and eventually sex orgies, which become part of the worship of nature. These are the Hamitic religions the Lord told the Jews to obliterate when they came to the land of Canaan, and because they didn't, it cost them their national security. Not only once during the time of the Judges, but again under Solomon, who brought with him up from Africa an Egyptian wife and loved the half-breed women of the Negroes. You'll find this business in 1 Kings chapter 13 and 14. Read them and weep. Don't talk to me about prejudice. Read the Bible. It'll broaden your outlook. And then show them the archaeological discoveries which show the times of the Judges and Saul and David and Samson, which are all there, including the horse stables for Samson's chariots and horses, Solomon's, and show them the works of Ezra Gabriel for making copper and brass, and the mines and the handling of gold and silver. Give the material on the Ahab's ivory palace and Jezebel's makeup kit, which are all found in the archaeological books. And by the time you get to the reign of Solomon, there's not a great deal of need to prove anything anymore. There's so much evidence after the time of Solomon that the Bible account is right. Not one man in 1,000 dares even raise a foot about it anymore. For this reason, the liberal has insisted that the majority of the Old Testament was written after Solomon's time. Anything but believe the truth. But the archaeological discoveries are so numerous and the evidence so voluminous, following, say, 1200 B.C., or following 800 B.C., that there's no point in even arguing about the matters. All the evidence of the kingdoms is there, all the evidence of Ahab is there, and Jehoshaphat, all the evidence is there for Nebuchadnezzar and Sennacherib and the captivity, all the evidence is there for the destruction of Jerusalem at the time of Nebuchadnezzar. Archaeological discoveries have confirmed the material found in Ezekiel, Daniel, and the return of the captives. From there on, you're dealing with history that's so well known, there's no problem. The book of Maccabees, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, record somewhat of a history, although it tends to a fairy tale sometime. What cannot be found here is plainly filled in by Josephus and some of